Up next, we have the Future of Decentralization panel with Yong, Sarah Manski, Alibrandi, Austin Davis, and Alireza Rafiei. Yong will be moderating the panel today. She is the founder of Protopia, which is Protopian Tech, is a very interesting company that is analyzing and building great communities and does some consulting work, I'm pretty sure, around all emerging technologies, including blockchain, AI, quantum computing, and pretty much anything that's emerging, mesh networks, a lot of cool stuff. So give it up for the next panel.
All right, so my name's Yong, co-founder of Protopian Tech. We do creative labs around emerging technologies. The idea is that you don't need to be afraid of what's coming next. You should be empowered by it and be contributing to it. And it's going to be a lot of amazing change that we're on the cusp of, even in the next 5 years. So it's an exciting time. I'm really happy today to be talking about the future of decentralization. And maybe just start off and just kind of go down the line with some introductions. Maybe you can tell us, how did you discover blockchain? What are you doing in blockchain? What keeps you up at night thinking about blockchain? And maybe your name or something like that.
Hi, I'm Sarah Manski. I'm a PhD candidate in the Department of Global Studies here at UCSB. And my research studies blockchain technology and public policy and ethics and social systems. And specifically what I'm interested in is technology and how it's used to either enrich humanity or commodify it, right? And which choice are we going to make? Globally, hundreds of millions of people are rising up and they're demanding that more than profit be valued. And the social movements of this global technological commonwealth, they're using new technologies strategically to shift value accounting beyond capitalism to a more commons-based economic system. So what I would like to talk about, if you're interested, is how we determine value and how we use technology to either enrich humanity and design into it affordances that will give us the things we want in our life and in the future, or not.
Hi, I'm Alibrandi. I'm a product manager at Dash Core Group. Dash Core Group is a Dash-funded organization that works to maintain and update the cryptocurrency protocol. So my work specifically is about building an application development platform that we're building on top of our cryptocurrency network. So you'll be able to store and secure your application data through a decentralized API that we'll be providing through all of the master nodes that are on our network.
All right, how's everybody doing today? All right, am I talking too loud? Austin Davis here, founder of Blockchain Beach, and we do a lot of hackathons through the Global Hackathon, mostly in Southern California, and work with a lot of great groups like the Rabbit Hole and the Plug, Crypto Plug. I see Naja back there. So some of the topics that interest me the most right now are related to community, kind of tribalism and energy, and how those things are kind of emerging and converging together. And this technology that we're talking about here is going to be very integral in the paradigm shift that is kind of happening right now in real time in front of us. So yes, it is revolutionary, and it is part of a tech stack that, along with other systems that combined together, will be very powerful altogether. So communication, energy, and mobility, which I had a conversation with Jan earlier. We're going to be talking a bit about that. So projects that I'm working on related to that, one is Pluton Group. One of the mining projects under that is going to be, next year when we break ground, is going to be the largest solar mining array for Bitcoin in North America. If you have any interest in that, I'll talk to you later. And then anything related to community and electricity and microgrids, and working on some things in that in Greater LA, which will be coming out next year. And that's pretty much it for me. I'm going to move along. Rafi.
Yeah, my name is Alireza Rafiei. I graduated with a degree in mathematics last year from UCSD. Then I got started working for Brian Fox, who gave a talk previously on this stage. My work mainly is in information retrieval, distributed system, blockchain, and whatnot. I'm also director of technology for the Blockchain Acceleration Foundation, and I help out in the everyday stuff. My interest in blockchain is mostly theoretical. I find it fascinating that blockchain provides a natural setting in which you can use tools from multiple different fields and get sensible results. With blockchain, you can use tools from game theory in cryptography in distributed system, and vice versa. And I find this stuff pretty interesting. I'm not 100% convinced that blockchains are like the future, but there are sufficiently many reasons, there are sufficiently many reasons justifying pursuing blockchains.
Great, so that gives us a line of debate to start from. If blockchain is the future or not. I'm in the future camp. But so what we'll do then is just kind of throw it out conversational style for various topics. First thing we want to do, and I think Cameron's just bringing it up right now, and we're going to see, one second, just like the idea of decentralization versus distributed networks. And it gets confused a lot. The definitions get swapped a lot or equated. And I thought it would be good if we had sort of a visual that Cameron's working on bringing up here. And obviously then a centralized system is what we see here on the left. That says Jan Yong. Yeah, that says central, no, Jan Yong. And then you can't see it very well, but decentralized then looks like there are some main nodes that might have some other smaller nodes in common or otherwise nodes of their own. So then not everything is connected. And then distributed is more like the Tangle or kind of architecture or something like that, where basically everything is connected to everything. Now what happens is decentralized and distributed get swapped a lot in terms of the definitions. And so I just thought it would be good to talk about like, what is the impact of these organizational structures? You know, why is it so hard for people to wrap their head? I mean, when I describe to somebody what is blockchain, I always start with, oh, it's Bitcoin, and then you've got the underlying technology, you know, and that sort of thing. We go through it all, and like, yeah, I'm getting it. They're like, okay, so who owns Bitcoin? Right? So the idea, well, no one owns it, and that's something it's hard to wrap your head around because it's not centralized. So I'm going to throw it out to you then. What do you think is decentralized versus distributed? What's the impact of it? And why is it so hard for us to wrap our head around it?
I mean, for me, it's pretty simple. And the image up above, what I think I'm seeing kind of lays that out. You know, centralized systems have one point of failure. Decentralized systems are somewhat better because some people are running nodes that you can use to run public blockchains, things like Bitcoin. And then the fully decentralized is true peer-to-peer, where everybody is opting into a network and basically acting as a node or participating in a network in a significant way to make it more secure and sharing transparently information. So that's pretty much it for me. So I think it's pretty simple, at least the way I'm seeing it right now.
Yeah, to piggyback off of that, I think that decentralization refers more to the power and control that's within a network, whereas being distributed refers more to like system resources. So another term for blockchain technology is distributed ledger technology. So like a copy of that ledger is distributed across every single node on the network. Whereas in a decentralized network, which typically they are one and the same, what we're talking about is governance of that network and how do we prevent malicious actors from corrupting the blockchain or destroying the network in some way.
Yeah, thank you for talking about power because it's often talked about in terms of system networks and coding, but they're real human beings often behind each of these nodes, especially in terms of governance. So in the cooperative movement that I study, they are very against decentralized systems and very for distributed systems for exactly that reason, that every individual can contribute and also receive from the network.
Versus like a mining pool or something that can be manipulative of a network.
Exactly.
Well, and another thing that I think about, because I think about architecture a lot, doing solutions architecture for when I'm advising sometimes. And so I think of sometimes decentralized, when you're thinking about Hyperledger Fabric, when you're thinking about like food trust. And so any of these more centralized nodes could be Walmart, Target, Safeway, whatever, and then they share in common some vendors, and then there's others that they don't. And so in that sense, even a private blockchain network could be represented amongst these in that respect. And so it's interesting when you're talking about like the data and the information being everywhere, but then the governance could be represented by decentralization and still describing the same blockchain. Because that's a completely different instance of this than kind of what I'm talking about, just talking about food trust or something.
I love food trust. Well, I mean, I just really like the use case. Food trust is a product by IBM that is focused on like food provenance or the food supply chain. But going back to your point, I totally agree. Like, I mean, decentralization I think is a spectrum, and you could have like a permission network, which, you know, for example, has like it requires someone's permission to join and be a node, and I view that as much more centralized, even though it is a little bit more decentralized than like a, you know, traditional system. But compared to something like Bitcoin or Dash, it's much more centralized.
Anyway, so I wanted to start there because you almost need the visual to talk about this concept when you talk about a decentralized future and what we mean by that. So we wanted to share that visual with you. We'll just keep it there for your reference. So another thing about blockchain that is differentiated from our current systems is really about governance, right? And what that brings. Because when you have these systems that are decentralized or distributed, in order to make any changes, then you have to have some way of coming together and trying to make that decision that it's going to be changed. And so then governance becomes very important. So throwing that to you now, what about like at Dash? What has been the impact of governance, and what have you seen? Has it broken down? Has it just worked out perfectly from the beginning and no changes needed? Or, you know, what's that been like?
It definitely hasn't worked out perfectly, but it is working. So Dash is a decentralized autonomous organization. So fees from the blockchain, transaction fees, are pooled into a treasury, and then master nodes, which are nodes on the Dash network that maintain the blockchain and also provide extra services, get to vote on different proposals that advance the network. And in a lot of ways, there are similar problems to what's going on in democracies all over the world today, where there's misinformation, and then there's other people that are within the community that are promoting, you know, false narratives and things like that will influence the voting process of what gets confirmed on the Dash network. So I definitely have some ideas, but it's probably too much to get into. But it's a challenge, and it's something that decentralized projects will have to continue trying to solve as they mature.
Yeah, I would say governance at a global scale, a lot of large-scale problems require small-scale local solutions, and that's why blockchain technology and other distributed ledgers is so has such great potential, I think, because it can allow for small-scale solutions within a larger network framework. And just to bring it back to the cooperative movement, there's distributed cooperative organizational governance, and it brings together the labor and actual practice of governance, and then the institutional structure of governance, and then you can add on top the technologies of governance, right? So, as you know, technology can never substitute for the messy, like, human-to-human interaction, but it can aid it, augment it, right? And so as long as organizations try to use the technology in an augmented sense rather than just replacing traditional governance, they'll be more successful.
Austin, any more thoughts on our decentralized future?
Sure. I'm going to tie it back to power, I guess, right? Because one of the major problems with distributing power as a resource from one centralized plant, let's say a nuclear plant or something like that, is there's a massive loss from there to the homes that it's going to, or the cities, right? Sometimes over 30% loss, which is huge. I mean, unless you're running superconductive wiring, which has to be liquid cooled to 0 Kelvin, it's just not feasible. That's a lot of liquid nitrogen you're dumping in tubes that might explode along the way. So yeah, it needs to be produced on site, especially in places like California, where there's tons of sunlight. Other places there's geothermal, there's plenty of hydro and wind as well. So for those systems, it makes a lot more sense to produce it locally. So we're starting to experiment with that. I mean, some communities are already up and running on that, right? So that's what really excites me, is to see these micro communities that produce their own power on their rooftops or with windmills or whatever it is, whatever the source is. They get to experiment with governance too. They get to decide, what do we do in a brownout? It's California, there's fires, like the sky's smoky for 5 days in a row, and we're not tapped into the main grid. What do we do? What are the main systems that we need to support? You know, so governance of the actual grid, like where's the power go, and things like that. So that's what's really cool, is that we're in real time experimenting with that in these micro communities and micro grids. And then also with, we're talking with somebody from Althea last night, I think she spoke earlier, and companies like Open Garden, and that's for the communication side of things, like decentralizing communication so you don't have to rely on Time Warner or any of the big telecoms companies. Certainly a lot of the systems still need satellites to communicate with, but Blockstream has launched a network of satellites. SpaceX is launching a lot more satellites through Constellation, so there'll be a lot of micro or nano satellites, if you will, that we can use as resources to run things like public blockchains, so we don't need the internet to do that necessarily. Point a dish in the right direction in the sky, even repurpose. I'm actually doing that right now at my house, repurposing an old dish network dish towards one of the Blockstream satellites, which you can do through an AR app and get the right hardware and set it up, running a node on a Linux Ubuntu, and yeah, you're running without the internet, you're running a full day. So it's really exciting that companies exist like that, because the same thing can be running a wireless network or something like that. So it's pretty awesome.
I hadn't thought of that, and I want to go pick up somebody's random old dish network.
Millions of them on rooftops that are unused,
nice.
so think about that.
Awesome. Rami, have we steered you away from your skepticism yet, or is there something you want to bring us down with, or provide another perspective?
Well, if the subject on which you're trying to, if the area you're governing is sufficiently important, I think that whatever governance mechanism that you put on top of the blockchain will be successful. But there are many DAOs right now. DAO is an example of a governance mechanism that blockchain enables, and voter fatigue is one of them. If for every single thing that you have to do, you would have to get consensus, you won't really be able to do anything. But on the I guess I'm convinced it's fine if like the expectations are set. For example, when it comes to doing governance on top of blockchain, and there are a lot of talk about fairness and whatnot, but there are some impossibility reasons in game theory that says that such arrow-keyboard impossibility theorem, for example, is one of them. It says that in any deterministic decision process, the result is either dictatorial or the election has only two choices, or voters will do tactical voting.
Right, so there's a lot of ways it can break down.
Yeah, you cannot really have,
Right.
yeah, it's not utopia, it's good, but
Sure. And speaking of the consensus note that you made, yes, a lot of the systems now require a high amount of consensus for something to go through. But the good thing is that there's new protocols that have already come out and that are being rolled out, especially next year, such as CBC Casper, that allow the user to have more control of it. Saying, my cup of coffee, I only need 20% consensus on this.
sure, yeah.
To make it go through, right?
Yeah, but
It's a big transaction.
I use the term consensus more generally in the context of a DAO. That is to say, if you want to fund this particular proposal, you would need to raise votes from the super majority of the stakeholders. This thing is there to sort of provide fairness, but again, voter fatigue. We have like numerous examples in the non-profits that we try to raise money, but yeah, people don't show up.
Right, of course.
And so just to finish up this, before moving on, just so there's a number of different. So DAO actually is decentralized autonomous organization, and so you see examples of it, whether it's part of a protocol. Then in some ways it's like the code where it's automating something, but there's also some role for humans and how they're participating in it. You also see like with so like in the case of the multi-collateral token that MakerDAO just recently came out with, how they add coins to that network then has a governance process that people are involved with in voting that can lead to voter fatigue potentially, because all of a sudden now we have to be very proactive and very engaged. And how engaged can you be if everything in your life is a DAO, right? If you have to vote on everything, like how many times do we even vote in our elections, right? What sort of participation level we get with that. And then there's also like the marketing DAO that first came about, that just recently came about, that's to support Ethereum. And that's another example where this is, Ethereum isn't technically owned by anybody, and now we have a marketing support structure that also isn't centrally organized, it's organized decentrally. So there's going to be all new ways of even working together and collaborating in our everyday working process that is going to be different. And so strap on and get ready.
I would just add to that the feminist cooperative commons-based version of the DAO is called the DISCO.
Disco.
The DISCO, yeah, for distributed cooperative organization. So there is an alternative to the DAO.
That's the beauty of emerging tech. We get to make up our own fun acronyms.
I want to learn more about disco for sure. Okay, so getting into it, another thing that this whole decentralized future brings us is another approach to identity and decentralized ID. So anybody thinking about that, working on that you want to sort of give the audience some perspective on?
Not working on it myself, but I'm all for it. Like if I could have one universal identity that I can share bits and pieces of with, some with the bank, some with my family, some with the DMV, that I don't have to piecemeal that information out constantly. It's just like recordable and retrievable on demand if you have access and permission. I think that's very useful moving forward. You never have to ask someone what their favorite color is or shoe size is or finger size is for your engagement ring or anything like that anymore, right? If it's recorded and retrievable. So I'm looking forward to it, and I encourage it, and I hope that and trust that good people are working on it.
Okay.
I totally agree, and Dash is working on this currently. The product that I'm working on, the application platform, will incorporate decentralized identities based on the industry-wide standard that has been emerging. So your identity is something that is core to who you are. In the case of a blockchain system, it'll probably be some sort of like numeric identifier, maybe a public key. And then you'll have attributes that will be associated with that identity. And an attribute might be a username that I share with people instead of my address so that you can send funds to that username. It might be my driver's license, and that driver's license has an attestation attached to it that was attested by like the California DMV. So that's a way that we can, create a repository of information about ourselves while also retaining control of that information and being able to share that with whomever we choose.
One of the important ethical implications of this identity topic is that freedom from technology is something that only the wealthy and elite have been able to purchase, right? And states have used technology to control and suppress the poor, right? And identity is a big part of that. And so we have to be really thinking about how will identity be used by states to keep track of, say, who has bad credit or who doesn't have a job, who's been incarcerated, things like that. And even though we can create blockchain-based identities that we supposedly control, like, is the state really gonna say that they don't have access to that?
No, they already have access to it.
Exactly. So anytime there's a new technology that's created, it often, pretty much always, is incorporated within some kind of state or corporate system of control. And that's just the nature of states, right? They want to do that. They want to extend their power more and more into your personal life. And so while I think that this may be a good thing, it could also be a really bad thing. That our identity is so able to be transferred and controlled, and we have to just pull it up for every little thing we want to do. Also, we should have the freedom to not have to share our identity. Will we really have that freedom if we want access to something? Like, now I have to give you something in exchange so I can buy this cup of coffee.
Yeah, I think that's going to be a choice of like, where do you want to live and how do you want to live, right? I think you will have the option to opt out of some of those systems. I mean, if you're on planet Earth, you're pretty much, you can be seen no matter where you are, right? Even if you're in a cave, probably, right? So I think it's a matter of like, okay, do you want to stay in the United States or do you want to like stay in a certain country or region that's governed that way and they make those laws? Because I think you always have the option to maybe move somewhat outside of that. But yeah, we live in a time where we're definitely fighting for our privacy because there's not a lot of it.
Definitely, but I think today we have such silos of information and data that it's hard for the government to even know, if you work incarcerated and you are going to drive a car, like they don't necessarily know how to connect those silos, right?
Yeah.
And so then you have blockchain, and you have the way that China is going to approach blockchain, and that's very centralized. You could, that picture that we had up, it was definitely the one on the left, right? So I'm sort of wondering, rather than a one complete ID, the way you were talking about, it's like one ID and I share portions of it. I wonder if it might be a little more decentralized than that. I might have a wallet that has a variety of different, my social media, my work, my DMV, my hospital records, and a variety of different types of data that I might have share with different types of organizations.
Sure.
And maybe a wallet of identity.
That
I'm hoping.
It makes sense. I mean, especially for things that you would rather remain anonymous, but you can use the information in the right way. So things like your genealogy, right? Like your DNA. As we know, like if you've done Ancestry or 23andMe, it's pretty much they own the rights to use that data. Not saying that they're going to go populate Mars with millions of you, but they might do something with it, right? And without, you already gave permission for that. So yeah, if you could protect certain types of information more securely, I think that makes a lot of sense, and maybe run it on a different chain or maybe an completely anonymous chain to whatever degree that you allow it to be anonymous based on your behavior, right?
Also, I mean, could you foresee a future where, let's say, if you want to use a cell phone, you don't really have the option to not share your information? It could just be that if you want access to this tech, you have to do it.
And that's what I was going back to, the choice. Like you have a choice of to use it or to not use it, but to make a phone call, they don't have the K phones anymore, so you might have to like really try to go find a landline.
Yeah, so I don't know how far away from where we actually are right now this would get us.
Right.
I mean, we already live, like today, that's already happening where we are, using products in exchange for using that product. I am implicitly allowing people access to my data, and then they can, manipulate that and harvest it and do whatever they want to do with it. And I'm optimistic, and I hope that these blockchain-based identity programs will provide people with more flexibility and more privacy that they don't currently have now. And within the system that Dash is creating, for example, you could have different identity attributes that are associated to different keys within your wallet. So theoretically, there's nothing connecting one piece of data to another piece of data except for the fact that I know it. And that's where the flexibility comes in with what I'm sharing with other people.
Well, and there are different architectures where you can allow people to keep their own data. Like if you had an app, people can keep their own data and it doesn't necessarily go into a centralized database or even decentralized database that the app or the company would control or anything. So hopefully we'll be exploring new ways of even storing the data so that we can maintain more of our own identity.
Yeah, and I think the really great thing is that the more toward the distributed model that we are, and at the very least decentralized, we have a better chance to fight, maybe more powerful technologies, right? Because everybody is participating in a more relevant way and makes decisions on how to upgrade the entire network, right? As opposed to a centralized system, whereas if it's not quantum resistant and they don't update it, then everything's just gone, right? But everybody else is constantly working together saying, hey guys, we're getting towards 1,000 qubits. We should think about making quantum resistant ledgers. We're not there yet. We're in the 100 range, but yeah.
So with being on the cusp of so many emerging technologies and quantum, et cetera, so we've seen at different times when the railroad was built out and the highway system was built out, there's the changes that then impact across all these different parts of the economy and industry. There's communication, energy, mobility, all of these things change at like major points of change. And my contention is that we're on the cusp of major change. So where we're starting to go towards mobility as a service and decentralized energy, as you were talking about earlier. Communication, we've already started to see a lot of decentralization, that sort of thing. So where do we see then the future of decentralization, or even what you're seeing right now? What areas is blockchain impacting? What are some of the killer apps and things that you're seeing, how it's getting applied?
I would say access, right? Not just of the information, but of physical property.
Like real estate?
Yeah, real estate, cars, things like that you can share with other people. Millennials aren't really buying homes right now. I don't know if it's a matter of college debt or just a shift in perception, but we're going to see a shift more and more towards that. Not that they won't, or people won't still, but there'll be a lot more sharing where you have the option not to for longer until a point where you might need to for one reason or another. Or if you do own something, you might not even need to live in it or use it full time or at all. And you can own a self-driving car and just put it into the network and make sure that it's maintained and checking in with it and it's out there earning another stream of revenue for you. So things like that, moving from ownership to access, I think we're seeing that. So it's pretty interesting. That's what I'm excited about.
For me, what I think is revolutionary about distributed ledgers is for the first time in human history, we're able to extend our trust beyond Dunbar's number, which is, the number of human beings you can actually physically know and trust. And that's something like 140, but that the materiality of our own bodies and our own brains limited us to a certain trust circle size. And everything, all our models of governance and commerce and everything else has grown out of that inherent physical limitation. And now we have this technology that allows us to expand our trust circle in ways that we couldn't ever before. And I have yet to find out how that will make itself known in new institutions and governance structures and ways of interacting economically in the future.
Yeah, if any of us knew what the killer app would be, we'd probably be very rich right now. That would be nice. I mean, I think that we're still figuring it out. And going back to what Julian mentioned during the keynote presentation about innovation that needs to happen, I think that it really needs to come from the business model side. I mean, the technology is continuing to develop and improve and get better, and that will keep happening. But this is a paradigm shift in how we deal with the internet. For example, like a social media network built on a blockchain is going to require people to pay for any sort of action that occurs on that network. And that's something that I don't think people are ready for or used to or familiar with. So like abstracting away that blockchain complexity so that an end user is using something that they don't necessarily know is blockchain based, but is cheaper, better, more trustworthy, that's going to be huge. But a couple of use cases, supply chain, decentralized finance, things like that.
When you say supply chain, what do you mean by that?
I mean the tracking of products from origin to like retail. I guess the entire life cycle of a product, so that a consumer can like trust and verify that their products are coming from ethical sources and that they're getting the best deal possible. And there's a bunch of use cases with food and shipping and things like that.
Yeah, with logistics in general, whether it's food or whether it's gold, like there's a lot of corruption along the chain, whether it's misrecordings or bad batches or theft. And I think this will help eliminate not all of that, but a lot more of that will go away. So it just makes the whole system more efficient to eliminate as much corruption as possible, right, along the chain. So it is about knowing where it's coming from, like, and then you're paying for what you're getting, but it's also about corruption reduction across the chain and a number of other things that it brings to it. Basically, efficiency of the supply chain.
Rafi, any last thoughts on future of blockchain?
I'm not really able to give you a killer app. I guess the analogy that I would use is that when internet first came out, people were trying to put phone books on the internet. But right now we know that phone books are not one of the applications of the internet. Proper applications of internet are Google or Twitter. I could use the Archibald Wheeler's sort of thought pattern, radical conservatism versus conservative radicalism. If you have a good idea and you want to find a good use case for it, how should you go about it? When it came to the internet, we know that with the internet we could have a network of connected people. So I guess conservatively radical idea was for a mom and pop shop to put like an advertisement on like a single web page, but that's not really a good use case for it. I guess the right way to go about it is that what sorts of problems are there right now for which you can naturally use blockchain. When it comes to that, it's difficult to come up with a product, my sort of main favorite is that blockchains allow you to have a trusted replicated state machine, a trusted AWS. This is, I think, by far the most useful example of a blockchain use case. Many sort of algorithms could be broken down such that they partially use blockchain and partially use traditional stuff. But again, all of this is for permissionless blockchains. And the supply chain stuff, the permission one, that's not really.
Killer app so far, Bitcoin. That's what got us all here, which is great. And then paradigm shift. Yep.
Yeah, running out of time.
Right,
Okay, cool.
so
Thank you so much.
spoiler alert, IoT, the next panel, good application of blockchain.
Yeah, and thanks to Cameron and PG and everybody for bringing us together. Thanks to you guys for showing up.